Hello, everybody. Welcome back into another edition of Prime Sports World. I'm, of course, David on point. Thank you very much for joining me here at Prime Sports World. I'm running solo for the time being. We'll see if some other people pop into the show as we prepare to break down this Houston Texans season. We're going to talk about what they're going to be looking forward to in 2022 and what their team could look like when it comes to the 2022 based on their draft and some other things real quick. Let me go ahead and take my screen down, share for a second. I will be back in just a second. I just need to share this show in a couple different places. Then we will be back with our regularly scheduled program. Be back in a second. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Thank you very much for being patient while I shared the podcast in all of the places. And if you have noticed, I have shared our StreamYard link on all of our pages on YouTube, on Twitter, and on the Facebook as well. So if you want to jump in and join in on the show, please feel free to do so. We're going to be talking about the Houston Texans here this evening. We're going to talk about their 2022 season. I've been David Huppin. If you're looking for consistent content on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Prime Sports World is a pretty good place to hang out. We go live about 6 or 7 times a week, bringing the most updated content when it comes to the National Football League, when it comes to the NBA. We just bring you consistent content. And again, my name is David Huppin. This is going to be our 2022 Houston Texans season preview. We'll see what we think, how their season we think is going to shake out as we go through this PowerPoint through the show. Again, if you want to join the show, StreamYard link is there, included in all of the chats. So if you wanted to join our show, you're more than welcome to do so. Obviously, keep your comments PG. Please like, share, and subscribe to the show. And let's get into it. So let's talk about Houston Texans first, their storylines. Let's talk about Will Houston love Lovie Smith. Lovie Smith is kind of one of those traditional coaches that brings a hard-nosed edge to the organization. His last couple stops didn't really work out all that well. I mean, he got kind of chased out of Chicago for a little bit there. I think he went to Tampa after that. It didn't really work out all that well. But, I mean, Tampa was really in a rebuild, kind of like this Houston Texans situation. I got to be honest with you, I probably wouldn't have taken this job if I was Lovie Smith, especially what happened to the previous coach. But yeah, he was the head coach of Tampa Bay after he was the Chicago Bears head coach for 8 years, where he went to the Super Bowl. Then he was the head coach of the Illini for 4 years. And then he gets promoted to head coach on this team as well. 2005 Coach of the Year. I think he's got that hard-nosed style. I think this kind of team, because they are in a rebuild, they kind of need that kind of guy. But you can make the argument they kind of had that guy with the guy they had before. Kind of brings a similar skill set to the table, obviously with much more coaching success than the other guy had. His name is totally escaping me right now. Let me see if I can pull it up real quick. And if you happen to know what the name of the guy, the coach. David Culley. Yeah, David Culley was the guy's name. He was fired after just one season. I am not necessarily thinking that I would have taken this job if I was Lovie Smith. So I think the verdict's still out if they're going to love Lovie Smith. I mean, based on the schedule, we'll get into that a little bit later. I think it's going to be a little bit difficult for him to have immediate success given the roster. I'm not even talking about the quarterback situation. Yeah, Houston is kind of a shit show after. Thank you, David Henderson, for joining us here at the show. I really do appreciate it. And David, if you want to join us on the StreamYard and actually, talk to me about the Houston Texans, I would love to have you on the show, man. The StreamYard link is in all of the places. It's in our Prime Sports World page on Facebook. So please, if you want to jump onto the show, join me. We'll talk a little Houston Texan football. We'll talk a little bit about Lovie Smith. And we'll talk a little bit about the Houston Texans and their current situation. And then what to expect for David Mills in year 2. David Mills surprisingly had a very good rookie season. He was quietly the second best rookie quarterback last season by far. Looking at 2,000 yards, 16 touchdowns, and 10 picks. It doesn't sound like much, but everybody else in this rookie quarterback class really struggled. Trevor Lawrence didn't play well. Justin Fields didn't play well. Zach Wilson wasn't exactly tearing up the world. So I think the fact that he played as well as he did on a team that's, outside of Brandon Cooks doesn't exactly have a lot of weapons on the outside. What am I expecting from year 2? A lot of the same. I think he's going to throw a lot. I think he's going to make a lot of passing attempts because this team doesn't really have a consistent running game to really talk about. Marlon Mack is a good player that they brought in free agency. I do like Dare Ogunbowale that they got from the Jacksonville Jaguars. Rex Burkhead's kind of on the tail end of his career. But, I mean, when you look at the wide receivers, Brandon Cooks, Nico Collins, John Michie III, who I liked as a player before he got hurt. Chris Conley's a good speedster. Chris Moorfield, their second speed, but he's kind of been a bust. They have a decent offensive line with Laramie Tunsil as long as they don't trade him between now and the start of the. Justin Britt is a good center. Kenyon Green was a gadget player for Texas A&M, can play all over the offensive line. I imagine they're going to start him at left guard, but there is potential where they could move him around on this offensive line and try to get more out of him than they did, in college per se. But yeah, David Mills, I expect a little bit more of the same. Do I think he'll play well enough that the Houston Texans, depending on their record, won't draft a quarterback in this year's draft? I'm not so sure. I think it depends on where they end up in the draft. If they end up with like a 4 through 5 pick, I think they'll let Davis Mills be the quarterback for this team one more season. I think they found a little bit of a hidden gem here. If they're picking in the top 3, I fully expect them to take a quarterback in this year's draft. There's just too many good ones. You can use Davis Mills as a trade chip at that point. Because you got to remember, Davis Mills was kind of thrown into a tough situation. I mean, he went to Stanford. He wasn't really ready to be thrown into the starting role. Tyrod Taylor, as Tyrod Taylor does, he gets hurt in the very early portion of the season. And Davis Mills became the guy, and he started the rest of the season. Played, hold on, let's see if I can figure out how many games he played real quick. 13 games. So that, that's a pretty good sample size, 60, almost a 70% completion percentage, 2,600 yards, 16 touchdowns, 10 picks. Sure, it doesn't sound like much. As I mentioned earlier, though, this is a team. This is a rookie quarterback class that really struggled in most of their first seasons as rookies. So we'll see what happens with Davis Mills, but I do expect a little bit more of this same. Davis Mills to take another step forward. I expect him and Brandon Cooks, as long as they keep Brandon Cooks on the roster, I expect him to build a rapport as they continue. And then the third storyline that we're talking about, do you think this franchise is relieved that Deshaun Watson cloud is finally gone from this franchise? And especially after the report that came out today about Deshaun Watson, I think this franchise is 100% relieved that he's no longer on this team. He all the sexual misconduct report that came out from the New York Times. It doesn't sound good at all. Like, he had therapy sessions with 66 women over 17 months, and Houston kind of facilitated this. The Texans enabled his massage habit. It sounds like this is going to be a mess for the Cleveland Browns, that he's going to get suspended probably. And I think the Houston Texans are 100% happy that they no longer have to deal with this Deshaun Watson problem. Deshaun Watson now is Cleveland's problem. They've moved on. They get to go and do their own thing now. They don't have to constantly wonder, Deshaun Watson, is he going to get suspended? Is he not going to get suspended? They've already got their return on investment. They got 2 first-round picks out of him. If you're Houston, you're happy. You get to be out of the cloud that was Deshaun Watson, and you get to move on with yourself as a franchise. They're 100% loving, relieved that the cloud is gone from this Deshaun Watson situation. Moving on to their draft, number 3, kind of a shock pick. They took Derek Stingley Jr. as the third player in this year's draft. Derek Stingley Jr. If that was their guy, DJ talks about this all the time. I'm kind of stealing DJ's thunder a little bit if he was here on the show. If Derek Stingley Jr. is the guy that you wanted, he wasn't going to be there at 15. You need to take him where you thought you had to take him. They took him at 3. There was at one point where he was the best corner by far in this year's draft. He fell a little bit because of the fact that he knew he was going to be a top pick, and he basically was like, I'm not gonna put myself out there and risk getting injured. Don't blame him whatsoever. Kenyon Green, Swiss Army knife offensive lineman, a little high for me at 15. I think they could have maybe traded back and gotten him somewhere else, but again, if you want him, got to get him where you had Jalen Petrie, an underrated safety, could have gone in the first round of this year's draft. Pretty good, solid pick. John Mechie III, we're probably talking about him as in the first round if he doesn't get hurt during that. The SEC title game against Georgia? If he doesn't get hurt during that game, he probably is a first round pick. Christian Harris, another linebacker out of Alabama. Damian Pierce gets them some running back depth. The guy out of Florida. Thomas Booker, defensive tackle out of Stanford, gives them some depth on that line. Tegan Corey Noreno, tight end at Oregon State. This is a team that definitely needs a tight end. Brevin Jordan is the only one on the roster right now that's really worth anything, along with Pharaoh Brown, who didn't do a whole lot last season. But yeah, Thomas Booker should see some legitimate time this season when it comes to their draft picks. Derek Stingley Jr. If you want him right there, you got to take him. He does have come with some injury history. Jalen Petrie continue improving the Texans secondary. They had one of the worst secondaries in the National Football League last year, and so now they get to add it with some depth there. John Mechie, good football player, really a good football player. Defensive talent on day 2, trading 5 ups to get the Alabama linebacker. I'm kind of taking this from the ESPN report right now. Damian Pierce, a good running back. He should be a good complement to Marlon Mack. Thomas Booker, defensive tackle. The tight end I talked about. And then there was Austin DeCoulis, the offensive tackle out of LSU. It's just adding more depth to the offensive line by drafting DeCoulis in the 6th round. He's expected to start right and left tackle spot set after drafting Green 15, but he could be a swing tackle. You just need depth at that position because you never know. I actually kind of like their draft. I like what they did. I mean, I don't necessarily love the Kenyon Green pick, with picking him where they took him, but everybody else, I think they hit a nail and hit it out of the park here. Derek Stingley Jr. I mentioned it. Like, this is a secondary that was one of the worst in the National Football League, and if Derek Stingley Jr. is the guy you want, he wasn't going to be there anywhere else. I like Jalen Petrie. I like John Mechie. Christian Harris is a good football player. Thomas Booker gives you some depth at defensive tackle, and you basically addressed all your needs in this draft, and you're going to have more draft capital next season because those Cleveland Brown picks are going to continue to come. Yeah, pretty solid draft for Houston. I think when we did the draft day analysis, I gave this like a solid B. I like what they did outside of the Kenyon Green pick. I just think he was too early there. But if he ends up becoming a contributor right away, it's a home run. Let's take a look at StreamYard, see if we got any comments from everybody. Nah. Moving up to their free agency additions. Steven Nelson, Mario Addison, AJ Cann, Jalen Reeves-Maybin. All of these players are kind of guys that, fine, I guess, but nothing spectacular by any means. So yeah, we got they lost. Yeah, Jalen Reeves-Maybin's an outside linebacker. He played for Detroit. He signed a 2-year deal. Mario Addison spent the last handful of seasons in Buffalo. He's now signed a 2-year, $7 million deal. He's a good football player. And then they take AJ McCann from the Jacksonville Jaguars. Signed a 2-year deal, $8.5 million. And then Steven Nelson, who's been a serviceable corner for most of his career, coming from the Philadelphia Eagles, signs a 2-year deal, go return or go to the Houston Texans, return to the AFC, because I think he was in Pittsburgh the season before. You can fact check me that. I could be wrong. So, I don't get everything right all the time. And then their key departures here, Justin Reed, he signed that big old deal with the Kansas City Chiefs where Tyrod Taylor was basically gone. So 3 years, $31.5 million. Jake Martin, a good outside linebacker, goes to the New York Jets, 3 years, $13.5 million. And Tyrod Taylor, it's been a journeyman backup for the last couple of years, goes to New York where he has the opportunity to start there in New York, depending on what goes on with Daniel Jones. Signs a 2-year, $11 million contract. They did some other fringe stuff. Like I mentioned, they signed Marlon Mack. They signed Fabian Monroe. I do expect Marlon Mack to be their number one running back, but I just don't know how much he moves the needle. And we couldn't even get on the field in Indianapolis, but they did have Jonathan Taylor. They re-signed Royce Freeman, who was a first-round pick at one point for the Seahawks. He hasn't really worked out in the National Football League. They signed Kevin Hogan to a 1-year deal, non-guaranteed. I was a big fan of Kevin Hogan when he was first coming to the National Football League. Jerry Hughes signed a 2-year deal with the Houston Texans, leaving Buffalo, joining his buddy Mario Addison, signing a 2-year, $1 million deal. He's 33 years old now. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of value Houston gets out of that investment, even though the contract isn't all that much. So, but yeah, I think when you come into free agency, I think this is kind of what you kind of expect when it comes to the Houston Texans. They're not a destination free agency spot. Players aren't clamoring to come to Houston and, play there at any point. But adding Steven Nelson, Mario Addison, AJ McCann, Jalen Reeves-Maybin, that's some pretty solid names. The Justin Reed hurt is going to hurt, but you think you replaced him with Jalen Petrie. So if Jalen Petrie pans out, you got a cheaper version of Justin Reed because he just basically priced himself out of Houston's market. This is a team that still has salary cap issues, even though they have no roster that's any good. Because, got Larry Tunsil making a bunch of money. Brandon Cooks is making some good amount of money. They have some money tied up to some other players as well. So, yeah, I think when it comes to the free agency, I think this is probably as good as you can expect from Houston until they kind of turn around their fortunes. I still think there is some negative energy around this team based on the way the DeAndre Hopkins trade went down. So that could be something that's still kind of biting this team in the butt there. And, now that they get the cloud out of Deshaun Watson, I think they can finally move on as a franchise. And I think that's going to be really important. So we'll see what ends up happening with this team moving forward when it comes to free agency. Down to the schedule, my friends. So let's break down how we think this season's going to shake out for the Houston Texans. If they're going to have a successful season, or if this is going to be another one of those seasons that they're going to look to regret. First game of the schedule, they got the Indianapolis Colts. This is for sure an L. Indianapolis Colts is going with Matt Ryan at the helm. I think is going to be one of the better teams in the AFC. Even though I did say that last year, but I think that's going to be 100% the fact that they're going to be one of the better teams in the AFC. Matt Ryan should stabilize that quarterback position for the Indianapolis Colts. give the first L for the Houston Texans. Then they go to Denver, and then they go to Chicago. I'm just going to lump these two teams up together because I think they lose both of those games. I think going to Chicago is a recipe for disaster, especially how I know the Bears don't necessarily scare you as much with their offense, but I still think that the secondary and this pass rush is still a work in progress there for Houston. I don't think they'll be able to generate the pressure to get Justin Fields under pressure in that game. So yeah, give me the Bears to take that game. And then I also have Denver winning that game as well. I have them going 0-3 through their first 3 games. And then the Los Angeles Chargers come to Houston to take on the Texans. And yeah, I think this is where they also take another L and they start the season 0-4. Los Angeles Chargers, I think they'll be extremely motivated to win this game, especially with how their season ended last season. I don't think they're going to let some game this is actually a team that they lost to down the stretch last season that basically cost them a playoff spot. If they win that game, they're not dealing with this situation. Chargers take this in a big way, 0-4 going into the game against Jacksonville. And when I did the season preview for Jacksonville and for the other night, I had Jacksonville and the Houston Texans splitting their season series. I'm not going to defer from that. So I'm going to have them go to Jacksonville and come out with an L. So they go 0-5 coming out of their bye, which wouldn't be the start that Lovie Smith wants with his tenure there in Houston. But that's sometimes the cards you're dealt. And then, they go to Las Vegas. I think they lose that game as well. I just don't expect them to have the offense or the defense to compete with Las Vegas, especially now that Davante Adams is on the team. And that conversation goes right back into when we talk about Tennessee. Derrick Henry has made a living running like crazy against Houston Texans. I think he's got like 200-yard games, or he might have 3 200-yard games in the last 2 seasons. That's how much he's eaten up the Houston Texans. They haven't done enough to improve any part of their defense to not allow that to happen. So I'm going to go Tennessee to get 0-6. And then the Philadelphia Eagles come to town, and you can basically copy and paste the conversation I just had about the Tennessee Titans with the Philadelphia Eagles. The Philadelphia Eagles are going to run the ball down the Houston Texans' throat, and I do not think they will have an answer to get that stop. So give me Philadelphia to go take them to 0-7, where they finally get some relief, where I think this is where they get their first victory of the season. I think they go to New York and take on the Giants. I think they come out with their first W here. I don't really believe in Daniel Jones. TJ calls me a hater, but it's true. I don't believe in Daniel Jones. I don't believe in anything the New York Giants are doing right now. I do think they had a pretty good draft, at least in the first round. Some of the stuff they did later in the draft is kind of questionable. But the getting rid of James Bradbury is not a recipe for success when you're in the New York Giants. So give me Houston to get off the schneid and get their first victory. They are now 1-7 on the season. Then they welcome in the Washington football team, Washington Commanders, which is still a terrible name. I don't care what anybody says. The name is terrible. The Washington Commanders come to town, and I actually think this is where they get their second win of the season. They have a 2-game winning streak here. So give me a victory against the Washington Commanders. And then they go to Miami. Unfortunately, their 2-game winning streak is snapped right there as the Miami Dolphins fan them their 8th loss of the season, and they fall to 2-8. And then they go to Cleveland, and then Dallas. Cleveland comes there, and then Dallas goes there. So it's first they go to Dallas. First, let's say they're taking an L against Dallas in Dallas, and then the Cleveland game. This could be, Deshaun Watson's coming home party, depending if he's not suspended at this point. Which it is apparent. Like I'm not really sure what's going to happen with that situation because he's not. I think it's going to be an 8-game suspension, and so if it's an 8-game suspension. Cleveland, he should be back by this Cleveland-Houston game. I'll be very interested to see what the reception's like when Deshaun Watson steps back onto that field at Byline Stadium there in Houston. When he gets back onto the field in Houston and what the reception is for Deshaun Watson, I think they will cascade him with boos, and then Deshaun Watson will cook them for 400 yards passing. I just don't think they have a chance of winning that game. They fall to 2-9. I'm going to make sure that's right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So no, 2-10. 2-10. Going to Kansas City. Actually, Kansas City comes to Houston at Reliance Stadium. Is that what Reliance Stadium? Is that the name of the stadium they're playing? Hold on one second. RNG Stadium. I thought I could have sworn it was called something else back in the day. Oh, Reliant. It was called Reliant Stadium at one point. They've just renamed it. That's another L, by the way. 2-11. Then they go to Tennessee for one of their final home games of the season. And yeah, I think they take another L there. If this is the final road game of the season, I apologize. Where they go down to 2-12 to the Houston Texans. And then Jacksonville comes to their house, and then Indianapolis also comes to their house. The final 2 games of the regular season. I will take them to beat Jacksonville, and then I will have them lose to the Indianapolis Colts. My math is off a little bit here, but I have them. So I have them finishing the season at 3-14. That is probably looking at a top 3 pick in this year's draft. I had the Jacksonville Jaguars finishing the season at 4-13 when we did the season preview for them earlier this week or last week. And so I think the Houston are going to be worse than what Jacksonville potentially could be next season. And I think they could be in a scenario where they're going to be taking a quarterback early in this draft. Especially if they finish the season 3-14, it's pretty clear that Davis Mills isn't the guy. So I think they will look to get a quarterback that they can kind of, but Bryce Young, the kid from Ohio State, CJ Stroud should be there at one of those points, and you can take him and build around him. I mean, they've done a nice job building up this offensive line. If you look at their offensive line, I mean, it's actually been decently built up. Laramie Tunsil, Kenyon Green, Justin Britt, AJ Cann, and then Titus Howard are all players that should be productive offensive linemen, assuming they keep everybody. Like Laramie Tunsil's been in trade talks for like 2 years. So if they do trade him, you have Austin DeCoulis that you just drafted this year. This should be an offensive line that should be able to get some push and should be able to provide Davis Mills with an opportunity to prove that maybe he is the quarterback of the future here in Houston. If they go 3-14, I think they will be looking other ways in the direction of, maybe taking a different quarterback. I think, but if you're a Houston Texans fan, I think you got to understand that this year is going to be a rebuild. Like, you traded away Deshaun Watson, he got rid of that headache. But this is not a team that was planning on going to the Super Bowl this season. And if you're a Houston Texans fan, you thought you were going to go to the Super Bowl, I got bad news. Like, yeah, you're not going to go to the Super Bowl. You're going to be one of the worst teams in the NFL, straight up. And if I'm wrong, if it comes out that like I'm actually wrong, so like at the end of the season when I come back here, I will admit that I was wrong about the Houston Texans, but I do not expect them to win over 4 games this season. There are a couple games on their schedule that I think could go either way. I think they could potentially beat Cleveland as they come into Houston. Just kind of that emotional appeal to kind of want to take them down. I think that could win that game, but I wouldn't bank on that in any way. So I guess we'll see. But yeah, this has been our Houston Texans season preview. Let me know what you guys think about our takes on their draft, on their free agency class. What do you think about the major storylines? Because one of the major storylines we talked about during the beginning of the show was, do you think they're relieved that the Deshaun Watson cloud is over this franchise? And I made the argument that this franchise is 100% relieved that he's no longer part of their franchise, and they no longer have to deal with the constant questions from the front, from the media, from any part of it. Like, they're just done with it. I do think that there'll be some of it because the reports make it sound like the Houston Texans enabled his habit, which doesn't look good on the franchise at all, especially if you're trying to get women to go to your games. I think it's not an ideal situation for that at all. But yeah, this has been the Houston Texans season preview. Please like, share, and subscribe to the show. We have streamed it on all of the places, on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube. So please continue checking us out. We are Prime Sports World in all the places besides Twitter, where we are PSW_David. And if you guys want to ever join a show, I always post the StreamYard link into all of the places. So if you want to join us and talk some football, we're going to be doing the Tennessee Titans season preview tomorrow. So please, if you feel the need, if you want to join us on one of these shows, you're more than welcome to do so. I'm David Huffman. This has been Prime Sports World. And at Prime Sports World, we bring the heat, baby. And we're going to continue to bring in the heat as we're going to try to get through all of the season previews before the season starts. The clock is ticking a little bit on our end. We got like 90 days. So we're going to get through it. I'm David Huffman. Thank you very much for watching. And stay safe out there. And we will see you guys tomorrow. Have a good night.